Angel Lust, a Halloween love story by Tom Balco, read by Adam Cunliffe.
Parting can be such sweet sorrow. A day can be as meaningless as the time it takes to pass it. Or, a day can completely change your entire life. What about a night, though? Can a person truly fall in love in the short time provided by the confines of a single, seemingly insignificant October night? It depends on who you ask, but I know it to be true, and I know the change such a love can bring about. The world can be so judgmental. I honestly expected more from everyone else. What a tragic race of rude and cruel creatures we have become. Even my own parents have fallen victim to the human condition and the shrill unacceptance of others that comes with it. Insufferable old things had barely even said hello when walking through the front door, and already I could tell they didn't like her. They're traditionalists, of course, but to scold me on the choices my heart makes, simply because of the woman I love, is a little different. That's more than over the line. It's unforgivable. Don't they know I love her because she's different? I love her because she cares, because she's stable and doesn't shy away when I try to hold her, which is more than they could ever say. Susie is my one and only, and she fits me like no other. She's the wind to my sails, the answer to my prayers. Yet, Mom and Dad look at her like she's somehow responsible for all the recent disappearances that have plagued our town. Well, who needs parents anyways? Susie is all I will ever need now, and I am forever hers. So you see, there's nothing wrong with Susie. Nothing at all. From the moment we had first met in that dimly lit back alley behind Martini's, there was obviously something between us. I saw her golden blonde locks from the far side of the bar's alleyway, like a beaming signal fire flaring in the otherwise dark and dreary city street. My voice trembled as I approached the fearless girl and told her that she ought to be careful hanging around in such a dreadful place, particularly since a lot of women had gone missing lately in the nearby area. Susie merely smiled at me as she put out the butt of her cigarette, the one she had gone outside to smoke in the first place, informing me then with only a look that nothing scared her. It was after that silent statement, when she went to playfully light her second stick, that I immediately started to feel a type of unfathomable chemistry between us. One that couldn't possibly be charted on any type of periodic table. One that defied the rules of rationalism and logic. It was love, all right, but not the kind that cliches might suggest. This was a love so instant and young and pure that it was unlike any other before. For she was unlike any other before. It was only a few minutes after sharing that second smoke together when it was decided the two of us would go back to my place, as if parting ways for even a moment was no longer an option in either of our lives anymore. The car ride there was somehow both quiet and exhilarating, wrought with the silent foreplay that only two soon-to-be lovers could possibly understand. The images and sensations of the short trip still run through my memory, as if I am living them now. My sweaty palms tightly gripping the steering wheel, that cracked window ushering in a cool breeze from the autumn night throughout the strands of her slightly disheveled hair, the quiet hum from the car's engine to keep the rhythm of the silent dance between us both. It all culminated back at my house in a bodily experience that was beyond being just sexual in nature, but rather symbiotic in spirit. I cradled her delicate frame against the center of my sweat-soaked body until the sun came to deliver a day that neither of us truly desired. We wanted that night to last forever, for the shadows of the dying trees cast by the hue of the blood moon that hung high beyond the window pane to consume us both, to meld us together as one singular whole. I had never realized how incomplete I was as a man until Susie was in my arms that night. the missing piece to a lifelong puzzle. With the beating of my warm heart safely wrapped in the vice of her cool and steady hand, nothing would ever separate us. Not even my mother and father, or their boorish, unfounded accusations. The sun did eventually reach the edge of the bedroom windowsill, unfortunately. Susie and I had only been awake for a few minutes when the news report on the television sent a shiver of fear down my worried spine. Another girl had gone missing, once again in the same area as the others. Her name was Margaret Cunningham, and the picture that the TV displayed next to that name was nothing short of stunning. She was gorgeous. Not as gorgeous as my Susie, mind you, but still pretty close. In fact, all of the girls disappearing lately had been radiantly beautiful. That revelation suddenly had me on edge, and once the news had cut to commercial, I immediately forbade Susie from ever going back near that bar alone. I know, we were only one night into our relationship, which is way too soon to be barking orders like that. And she probably wouldn't anyways now that she had me, but these disappearances were getting serious. I promised her I'd do the same myself, and with that reassurance, Susie seemed to agree to my demand. It was Halloween, after all, the night where all the crazies and sycophants come out from beneath their cloaked visages to cause mischief and mayhem, and I couldn't risk Susie falling victim to any of their acts of depraved debauchery. So we decided to stay in for the night. It had been years since I had actually celebrated the holiday in any kind of meaningful way. But in spite of my fears for Susie's safety, the sudden urge to do so had swiftly come about. Maybe it was how my love looked at me that morning, with vacant admiration after our wild night together. Or maybe it was just the way the dead leaves calmly floated down past the bedroom window onto the cold dew grass. Something had put me in this newly festive mood, and after a quick shower, I immediately indulged it by making way to the shed to dig out some old decorations. The dilapidated wooden door creaked open like the entrance to a spooky haunted house, revealing a floor littered with the remnants of stinky, disregarded things from the past. The shed was almost never clean, but it seemed I had really let it go to hell these past 2 years. After some pushing and prodding, however, 4 or 5 old boxes, consisting of fake cobwebs, orange string lights, and dusty plastic jack-o'-lanterns, soon revealed themselves. Giving each one a quick peek before I plucked them out and brought them onto the front porch, I saw that one of the boxes had a few costumes tucked within it. The first was a somewhat aged black robe, the kind priests wear while taking confession, only the collar seemed to be missing. It was my father's from a party a few years back, the sort of thing he wore ironically, being about as far from religion as one could get. The second costume was thankfully a far more interesting find. It was my mother's, and all it consisted of was a thin white silky dress, coupled with a pair of feathered cupid's wings. It felt old, like something she had worn before I was born, but the fabric aged gracefully, and the pale white still glowed beautifully. I knew right away that Susie would love it. Once all the boxes were on the porch, it was time to decorate the front of the house. A lot of it was a one-man job, specifically the lights, which required my tall reach in order to be hung evenly. But Susie was still kind enough to hold the slack while I strung them perfectly along the gutters. All that was needed was candy for when the trick-or-treaters finally arrived, and luckily the supermarket was right down the road. Susie stayed back at my place to try on her costume while I ran out and picked up bags upon bags of the sweet treats for the incoming kids to enjoy. All different kinds: lollipops, chocolate bars, candy corn, sour candies, hot candies, hard, soft. You name it, I bought it. We were going to be the most popular house in town. I wanted to really participate this year, but mostly I wanted to show off Susie to all my neighbors. When the car pulled back in the driveway, it was about mid-afternoon, and Susie still hadn't put on Mom's old costume. At first I thought it was because she didn't like the outfit, but it soon became clear that she just needed help putting the dress on. Once we finally got it over her head and past that immaculate blonde hair, she instantly took my breath away. She already looked like one of God's heavenly creatures, but now she was truly perfect. We perched 2 chairs on the front porch after filling some big plastic bowls with the recently acquired candy and sat patiently for the children to arrive. After a lot of back and forth in my head, the decision to wear my father's old costume was reluctantly made. It certainly wasn't my first choice of attire, but I had few other options. It was either the black robe or nothing, and after all the work that went into decorating the house, I couldn't be without some festive flair myself. Once the dusty robe was on me, though, it felt oddly fitting. The sun began to set as all the playfully masked children started to come out in droves. One by one, they reached our porch and opened their bags with innocent anticipation. I was sure to give each of them a large fistful of eclectic candies to reward their trek up the driveway, and as I did so, almost all of them stopped to admire Susie and her wonderful costume. The kids really got a kick out of it, in particular the girls, who all blushed and giggled when I told them that the pretty lady before them was my girlfriend. We were indeed the most popular house in town, as we saw each child in the neighborhood at least 2 more times. Everybody loved us, and for a brief moment, everything was magical. That changed, however, when the phone rang. Most of the children had slowly thinned out as the night was winding down. I helped Susie up after we'd spent the last couple of hours in those unforgiving chairs, doling out candy, with the 2 of us then making our way inside before my hand finally picked up the phone. And it was Dad on the other end, sounding more dismal than usual. His mumbling but authoritative voice informed me then that he and my mother were going to stop by in a few minutes, claiming that they hadn't seen me in a while. Apparently, they were worried about how I'd been doing. Little did they know how happy I truly was now that Susie was around, but I didn't see the harm in a small visit. It gave me the chance to finally introduce them to her. My palms began to sweat again in anticipation of seeing the headlights from Dad's pickup truck make their way up the driveway. Susie and I waited patiently on the couch to see the glow from those plastic rectangular casings peer past the living room window, signaling their arrival. When they did, my hands began to shake. All I wanted was their approval and validation, for them to have loved her even a fraction of the amount that I loved her. But when the truck's engine finally turned off, and the 2 crotchety senior citizens headed for the front door, nothing but their shame and embarrassment seeped through the doorway with them. Mom's smile was so veiled and weak, it was downright pathetic. She looked at Susie and I snuggling on the couch, with our arms around each other with no initial objections, but after a few brief seconds of trying to keep it together, she placed a hand over her mouth as if to vomit. Her lack of manners was outstandingly coarse, and Dad wasn't much better. He just stared at us with his jaw halfway to the ground, probably jealous because Mom never looked half as good as Susie did in that dress. I went to say something to make them stop their staring, but Mom immediately started erratically yelling. Tears flowed from her eyes as she agonizingly claimed that they couldn't keep doing this for me. Dad looked disgusted as he quickly left the room and went out the back door for some fresh air. I almost cried myself because none of it made any sense. Why did they hate her so much? I yelled back at my mother and demanded immediate answers. Why wasn't my Susie good enough for them? Why weren't we good enough for them? It was then that my mother really started to confuse me. She started talking like a crazy person, saying that Susie wasn't really Susie, that she was that Margaret Cunningham girl on the news, the one the police were looking for. How could she possibly think that? Sure, they had the same hair, but the similarities stopped there. I've met Margaret, and the 2 are nothing alike. Margaret's eyes were blue and sharp, while Susie's are soft and cloudy, like heavenly skies. Margaret's touch was warm and harsh, while Susie's is as cool and soothing as a winter's snowfall. Margaret's manic heart would scream almost as loudly as the girl herself did, not at all like the silent, calming stillness that comes from my Susie's heart. The 2 women couldn't be further apart. My father returned, bursting through the back door as if he had seen a ghost, maybe even several. The clearly shaken old man looked at Mom and proclaimed that the shed was even worse than the house. Not sure what he meant by that. The shed was messy, but not enough to have a panic attack over. He kept apologizing to me through his hyperventilating before finally heading for the phone in the kitchen. His trembling fingers managed to dial 911, but I could only partially hear the conversation that ensued. He kept frantically saying something about the missing girls and their killer. I don't really know for sure. It was hard to make out what exactly he was trying to articulate through all of his crying and exaggerated breathing. Mom was still crying too, holding herself as she stared out at Susie, sitting silently on the couch. It was so embarrassing, and I just couldn't comprehend it. Susie was such a non-threat to them all. She wouldn't even harm the flies that were buzzing about her head. Then it hit me. They were jealous. They were jealous that Susie had all my love now, and that there would be none left for them. So they were trying to go and pin all those missing girls on her. It was a sad show of desperation, and it had to be stopped. My father was still on the phone when I charged into the kitchen and slapped the device out of his hands. He threw his arms up in disbelief, and after that, all it took was one solid push to the chest before he was launched backwards through the basement doorway that was next to the kitchen pantry. I heard almost every fragile bone in his ancient body twist and break as it tumbled down the steep concrete stairs and onto the large tile floor. My mother came rushing in after all the commotion, shrieking her head off. She stood atop the stairwell and screamed while looking through the broken doorway to see my father peacefully laying on the basement's hard surface without a care in the world. She clearly yearned so badly to be with him, so I gave her a good push to oblige that desire. All the crying and screaming finally stopped, and for a moment there was blissful silence. It was short-lived, however, for in the distance, police sirens could be heard from a few blocks over. I thought about staying put, about explaining to the cops how ridiculous my parents were being. But as I myself stood at the top of the stairs and looked down at the basement floor to see my mother affectionately resting upon my father's chest, another idea came to mind. It was also obvious now what I had to do. There was no chance the police would ever see Susie's and my side of things. They would try to tear us apart, just like my parents, and I couldn't allow that to happen. Time was running out, but if I did things right, time would no longer matter for us. I headed quickly into the living room and perched Susie over my shoulder, hastily making our way to the car. Helena State Park was only an hour's drive, but the lack of traffic at night made that trip even shorter, especially since I knew the way by heart. This car ride was almost as romantic as our first together, but the task at hand ultimately had my attention. Susie spent the short trip curiously staring out the window, with her forehead against the glass, and it wasn't long until the dirt road entrance to the park finally revealed itself. The woods there were hellishly dark when we arrived, so much so that I began to feel a little scared. But with Susie by my side, no fear would ever take control of me again. We left the car and started walking a good 3 miles or so out into that darkness. The children of the night that lived within the brush and nearby caves cheered us on as their howls and screams echoed off the dying trees. My arms and legs were exhausted, having to carry her such a long way, but Susie's love lent me strength. Through the thick of twisted branches and decaying autumn leaves, I finally saw the clearing. It was bathed by the majesty of the pale moonlight, just as it had been upon my last visit. After putting Susie down, I used whatever muscle that was left within me and flipped over the large flat rock that was near the dirt mound made during my previous retreat, revealing the small opening of our new home. The heavy rock took a while to fully move, but Susie had been patiently waiting on the ground as the playful wind danced in her hair again. Only once while working did I have to fight off a woodland critter from disturbing her. We made our way down the deep small hole and into the pitch-black bunker, the one that I had originally made to dispose of all those past smelly unwanted things from the shed. Now it was to become our current residence instead, our dream home. Running my palm across the thin wood ceiling, it seemed certain that the whole thing would cave in if the main support beam received a decent blow. Once Susie was gently placed on the dirt floor, I knew I never wanted to be anywhere else, with anyone else, ever again. My hands searched about for her body in the darkness until she was securely in my arms, once and for all. I kissed her forehead and felt that cold skin on my lips and tongue one final time before kicking the main support beam behind me. The bunker ceiling, however, only partially caved. A considerable amount of dirt still managed to pour into the collapsing hole like a river of ash once the wood broke halfway, trapping us in our new home forevermore. That initial break caused the dirt to pile and rise to about a quarter of the way up our faces. I tried punching through the ceiling to widen the crack in the wood after that, but my weak arms couldn't manage much before they shut down completely. Thus, I lie here now, watching the remaining dirt from above trickle down like sand through the hourglass, preparing to consume us both. Is it under love's heavy burden that we sink? Or is it just the weight of the world from above, trying to bring us down even further? The world would never truly understand us, but for one magical night we had our fun with the trick-or-treaters and got to feel a slice of normalcy and kindness. Only the younger generation gives me hope these days. It's a shame Susie and I will never have children of our own, but maybe in the next life. Who am I kidding? There is no next life, and this one wasn't all that great either. Who needs the fleeting ways of life when our bodies will twine together in the forever rot of death? Who needs the individuality of souls when our flesh and bones will be eternally cemented as one? And when they find us hundreds, maybe even thousands of years from now, people will stare in awe of the holy man and the angel in his arms. They'll write tales of our inseparable need for one another, dreaming about our romantic deaths together, maybe even display us in a museum as a shining example of what they would all wish to one day achieve. But our love is special, and no one will ever really know how unbreakable the bond we have is. It's remarkable what can come from just one day, how everything can change. I strike the only match in my pocket to get one last look at Susie before we go off into our isolated infamy. The fire brings out her beauty in unimaginable ways. I run my hand down her pallid face and place it on her soft neck. It's a perfect fit to the bruised palm imprint around her throat, a permanent reminder of when I first had this hand around that throat behind Martini's. Like a puzzle piece, I fit her like no other now. She was made for me, and I for her. Technically, the holiday ended hours ago. Everybody knows, however, that the 31st of October isn't truly over until the dawn. Luckily for us, the sun has yet to rise, and it never will upon Susie and I ever again. So before this match goes out, and my heart becomes as still as hers, I'll share my final farewell to my Susie, and my Susie alone. Let me whisper, between the cold bedrock and dirt, into your clammy, stiff ear, the day that changed our painful lives into sweet, blissful death at last. Happy Halloween, my love.
Hey, hope you guys enjoyed that story. If you did, check out our other ones and subscribe so that you can get notifications when the new ones are posted. You can also check out their written forms on Wattpad, along with my first collection of shorts. And be sure to acknowledge the names in these end credits as well, because everyone put a lot of really hard work into making this a reality, and I can't thank them enough. If you'd like to support us so that we can make these even better and faster, that can be done through the links in the description. There's a Patreon where you can get early access to new stories and physical copies of all my writing, or you can just buy us a cup of coffee on Ko-Fi. Either way, thanks for listening, and hope to see you guys again soon for the next one.